Good morning. It's so great to be here, and I've spent the last couple of days getting to fellowship with many of you, and that's been a wonderful time. And I think that's exactly what we're going to talk about here this morning. And we're going to get to fellowship some more with a meal and some more conversation this afternoon. Humans are not meant to live alone. Now, I want to clarify that just a little bit because I'm not saying that everybody is supposed to get married. The Bible does say that it's okay for a man not to marry, but we're not meant to live alone. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I think we learned a few things about this. A survey was done of high school students on this topic, and now I want to be clear here. When you give surveys, sometimes people are not always completely honest, especially about things they struggle with. So these numbers could actually be higher than what the survey found. But the survey found that 37.1% of high school students experienced poor mental health during the pandemic. In addition, 44.2% of students experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. Almost 20% seriously considered committing suicide, and 9% actually attempted suicide. I don't know about you, but those numbers are staggering to me. Staggering. And this was just studies of high school students, and it was done by the CDC. There's another study from Boston University School of Public Health that reveals that depression rates tripled in 2020 in adults and went up again in 2021, with now 1 in 3 Americans, 32.8% of adults, struggling with depression in some ways. And those are just the ones that are being truthful about it. 32.8% of Americans are struggling with depression. We as humans are not meant to live alone. We need other people around us. This morning, we're going to explore the idea of building unity through community. If you were in the class time in here this morning, we talked about unity for the whole time. And we spent the whole time doing that. But right now, I'm just going to give us a couple of points that I said this morning. So for a few of you, this might be a little bit of review for us to look at. But I want to take a look at a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to read here from Ephesians in a second. But the first thing is I want you to know that unity in the church, we have to have a doctrinal center. And that center for us has to be Jesus Christ, the message of the gospel. It has to be there. We must focus on Jesus as the center of our community. When things start to break down in the community, we must push towards our head. That is Jesus Christ. Think about Jesus in the middle, and instead of, a lot of times you have people, I had this image in my head of these people in a circle with Jesus around and Jesus in the middle. And a lot of times what happens is when we're in that circle on the outside and things start to fall apart, instead of pushing towards the middle, what do? We run away. We leave. Or we develop our own. We say, I'm going to move myself away, and I want people to come with me. Right? We lose the sense of community and we break away because it's hard, right? Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 15, says, rather, speaking in the truth in love, we are able to grow up in every way into Him, who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. What a beautiful picture that God has given us. We have this community of people who, when we struggle, we grow into Christ. We lean into Him, and we come back to that core which defines us, and that's Jesus Christ, our doctrinal center. One of the most important points about unity in our community is that unity does not mean uniformity. We are not all going to have exactly the same beliefs, thoughts, ideas, And that's not something that should divide us, but that's actually a good thing. We can reach more people that way. We can use all of that to build an even better community. And the last one I will mention this morning is that unity grows when it is stretched, pressured, and even threatened. And it takes time. It doesn't just happen all of a sudden. Just because we have a common bond in Jesus Christ and he is at our center or our head does not mean that it will come easy. Proverbs chapter 27 and 17 says, iron sharpens iron and one man sharpens another. Iron can't sharpen other iron if it's not close to it. It has to grind against it to sharpen it. And anyone knows that has lived with anyone for a long period of time and sometimes even a short period of time, that sometimes conflicts arise when you live with people. Never happens in our house, right? That's what everybody's thinking right now. No, nobody's thinking that. Conflict happens from time to time. And that's okay because these things are going to help us grow and mature. And the unity that we need to grow in the community. You see, we weren't meant to live alone. Even from the very first human, we see this. In Genesis chapter 2, God says, look, it's not good that man should be alone. We're 2 chapters into God's word, and he already has said it's not good for man to live alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. Now out of the ground the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was his name. The man gave names to all the livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. And while he was asleep, he took one of his ribs and he closed up a place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from Adam, taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. See, God made Eve specifically for Adam because he knew that man shouldn't be alone. Let's take a look at a couple of other passages that talk about unity and community. Psalm 133:1 says, behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. I don't know if you've ever seen a group of people that dwell and they're not in unity or they're in disunity. It's hard to watch. It's hard to see. It pains us to see and hear that. But when they're dwelling in unity, it's such a beautiful picture. I don't know why I think this, but older couples, and I think okay, let's talk in 90s. You ever seen an older couple in their 90s who's out and they're out and they're going to dinner and they're still holding hands as they walk? It's such a beautiful picture of love and of that unity, of that bond that comes together. I love that picture. And I think it's there. We are meant to dwell with each other, but not just dwell. We're meant to dwell with each other in unity. One of my favorite passages is from 1 John chapter 1, and it says this, but if we walk in the light as he, Jesus, is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus cleanses us, his son, cleanses us from all sin. If we walk in the light of Jesus Christ, guess what happens? We have fellowship with other believers. We're walking with them, hand in hand. We are there together. So why does it work? Why does this living in community thing work? Well, Ecclesiastes 4 tells us this. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. As my grandmother has gotten older, she's now living at home alone. And she has one of those things called Life Alert, right? Because if you fall down when you're all alone, you need somebody to help you up. That's a pretty good example of what we just heard, right? When you fall down, there's somebody there to pick you up. But I talked about in class this morning, and I said, isn't it a great thing that when you start to fall, that those around you know you so well that they know you're about to fall, and they're there to catch you before you fall. But they're also there to pick you up when you do. Such a beautiful picture. Chris read for us earlier from Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. I'm going to read it again here, and this is a little bit different. This is from the ESV, not the NIV, so it might be a few different words here. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meeting together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another. And all the more as you see the day drawing near. This is telling us that we're supposed to be together. We're supposed to meet together. We're supposed to encourage one another, pick each other up, know about what's going on in our lives. And let's take a look at one more example of this in the New Testament, Acts chapter 2. You know, we probably know a lot about Acts chapter 2, but let's read here, starting in verse 42. It says, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles, and all who believed were together, and they had all things in common, and they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts. Community is such a great thing. It's a beautiful thing. I remember a time in Manhattan where we had some severe flooding in part of the town. One of our families at church lost pretty much everything in that flood. They lost everything they owned. They lost the house they were living in. They lost their cars. They lost a lot of their clothing and their belongings. They didn't have anywhere to go. I got to help coordinate some of the help that was going to happen from the church and also from the school. And boy, did I see the community take action. They found the family for them to live with for several months. It wasn't just for a few weeks, for several months. They received clothes and furniture. They had meals made for them. In fact, they received so much stuff that I had to find places to donate all the extras that they didn't need. What a great outpouring. In fact, a couple of the mattresses that we got ended up down at Silver Maple Camp. A few months later, it took a while to get them there. But how cool is that the family and the body of the believers came together and overpoured and overflowed that what they needed. The community really stepped up to be with them and to hold them up. This is exactly what is supposed to happen in communities. We are to be looking out for one another. John 15, starting in verse 12 says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. We're to love one another as Christ loved us. I want to take a look at a story from the Old Testament, just real quick. This is a great example of how community is supposed to work. So I'm going to give you some background. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm only going to read a little part of it, but I'm going to give you some background. In Exodus chapter 17, the Israelites are battling the Amalekites. Okay? Joshua is going to lead the army into battle. Now let me give you a little bit of background. Right before this, the Israelites are complaining. Imagine that, right? I could tell any story of the Old Testament and say, right before this, the Israelites were complaining about something. But they were complaining that they didn't have enough water to drink. And Moses is, guess what I could say this to? Moses is frustrated, as he often gets. And Moses is frustrated, and he's throwing him up against everything and saying, basically, why are you asking me? Like, why don't you ask the guy who gives things, right? He does all this. And Moses ends up striking this rock, and he gets water out of this rock, and the people get the water. And then they go to battle, okay? And this is, the way the text reads, it almost feels to me like this happens almost immediately. You know, sometimes in the Bible, you have a story, and then there's some time that passes, and then the next story. This one feels like it's happening pretty soon. And so they're going out to fight the Amalekites. And here's the thing. Moses is like, hey, Joshua, I am going to go up on the top of this hill, and I'm going to watch the battle. Okay, can you imagine, like, you know, Moses, think about how old Moses is here. He's probably pretty old, okay? He spends part of his childhood in Egypt, then he goes out into the wilderness for 40 years, then he comes back and he leads, and now we're back. So we're talking, he's pretty old. So Joshua's leading the people into battle, and Moses is there, and he's up on the hill, and here's how it works. Moses has this staff, And as long as Moses keeps the staff in the air, the Israelites are winning the battle. But what happens when he drops his hands? They start losing the battle. So let's read here. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 17, and I'm just going to read verses 12 and 13. But Moses' hands grew weary. Now, let me stop for a second. Imagine this. Have you ever tried to hold your hands up for a long period of time? Okay, I have a story about this. When I was in college, I went to York College. In York College, we have social clubs. They're like fraternities, but they're more like we do community service together, play intramural sports, those types of things. We don't live in a house together or anything like that, but we have meetings. And we have a process you have to go through in order to get into these clubs, right? It's called initiation. And a lot of it's biblically based, and we learn a lot of valuable lessons. One of the things that we had to do during this was my group had swords. And now the swords were made out of wood, and they were custom made by these people, and they weren't sharp. You couldn't stab somebody with the sword, but they were symbolic, right? And so mine was interesting because it had a bunch of Russian writing on it, and it had Bible verses on it, and that was all part of what I was learning for that week. I had to learn what the Russian meant. I had to learn what the Bible passages were talking about, and I had to be a barbarian for the week. I had to wear sackcloth, and I had to, all that fun stuff. But one of the things we all had to do was you had to take this sword, and you had to hold it when you were at attention. You had to hold it like this. You know how long you can hold your arms like this before they start getting tired? Yeah, I'm weak, not very long. Now that wooden sword was one thing. But then we had another sword called the Duke. I don't know why it's called the Duke, but it is. The Duke was made out of metal. Now I'm not talking about a metal sword that you would want to go out wielding in a sword fight. It was more a metal sword for display that you would hang like on a wall. It wasn't sharp, but it was heavy. And if you got in trouble by saying something you weren't supposed to, or just because, somebody had to hold the Duke. And boy, holding that thing up took a lot of stamina and strength. So when I think of Moses here, I think of him holding up his staff. Now, I don't know about you, I've never actually been to a battle. I've watched some reenactments, I've seen some on movies and TV, and I've read about them. But how long do battles last? They're not usually a half an hour. Like, could I hold my arms here like this for half an hour without dropping them? Probably. Could I do an hour? I wouldn't want to. But I'm thinking this is going on most of the day. So I understand. And again, Moses is not a young spring chicken, is he? He's an older guy. He's up on this hill, and he's holding up his staff, and he's holding up his arms, and his arms grow weary. I mean, we can all be there, even if we're not old, even if we can think of ourselves when we were young. At some point, you're going to start complaining. Aaliyah's going to take about 5 minutes, and she'll start complaining, maybe 6, okay? And that's okay, but she doesn't like to be discomforted, and it's a discomforting thing. So Moses is holding his arms up, and let's look what happens. But Moses' hands grow weary. So they is Aaron and Hur, okay? So they took a stone, and they put it under him. Think about that. They take a stone so he can sit down, because holding your arms up like this while you're sitting is a little easier than standing. And then it says, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. The battle's not the important part here, is it? You see, this is a beautiful picture of community. When they saw, now granted, they were trying to win the battle, but when they saw his hands go down, they got him a stone to sit on, and they held up his hands. That's what we do when we live in unity in our community. It's a beautiful picture. It's exactly how community works. When we all work together, we all grow. We all mature, and guess what? Our unity will grow as well, like we talked about earlier this morning in our class. So then you might be asking yourselves, well, that's a great idea, but how do we do it? Here's the application. Spend the rest of the time on the application. I've got a lot of points here, and probably we could come back and probably do a sermon on each one of these points. So we're going to go a little bit quick, as far as that, but I think these are really important. So what can we do? How do we build community? The first one might sound like to you like a cop-out, like something every preacher would say, and we would, but it's so true. Pray for each other. But we really need to pray for each other. We need to be praying for the needs of each other fervently. You know, sometimes we should pray without ceasing. We should be able to talk to God at any moment, but we should sometimes really stop and say, I'm going to pray for that person and that family fervently. We don't actually always know what every person needs, but God does. We should be praying for them even when they aren't in times of need. I think having a prayer list in the bulletin is a wonderful thing, and we should pray for each and every one of those things. But you should be praying for each and every one of your brothers and sisters in Christ, even if they're not on the prayer list. You should be praying for the people in your neighborhood all the time. You should be praying for the people in your schools, in your kids' schools. You should be praying for your leaders of your country and your city, your county. You should be praying for the people of God all the time and fervently. And this next one, these are all going to kind of go together, because when we pray for each other, then we need to care for each other. And not just care for doing things for each other, we do need to do that too, but we need to care. We need to truly care about them. When you care about someone, guess what you have to do? You have to get to know them. You got to get to know them deeply. You understand who they are, what they're dealing with. You want to do everything you can to ease their struggles and celebrate with them on their victories. You take an interest in them. You want to know who they are and what makes them tick. You want them to thrive. We should want that for everyone, but we've got to find those people close to us, and we've got to do that for them. Care for them, really care. And to do that, sometimes we have to ask questions, and I don't think it's just questions like, how are you doing today? That's a fine question, but I will say, if you ask somebody, how are you doing? I think you should be ready for the long answer and not the short answer. We far too often say, I'm fine, I'm okay. I hear this a lot. I hear this one a lot. Well, if I was any better, I'd be dead. But we hear those, and sometimes those are just to make conversation. When I went to visit Japan, they had this thing. There was different ways to say hello. Okay, so you've got if you are from out of town, and you don't know anybody, you say domo arigato gozaimasu. Okay, that's like the most honor and respect you can do, right? In America, we would, I don't know what you would do for that. Ours is a little different. But over there, if you are like kind of acquainted with someone and you don't want to be quite as formal, you just say domo arigato, right? Okay. But then if you are familiar with the person and you're just saying it in passing, you just say domo. And so you walk around there in the morning and you'll hear people, domo, 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 domo. It's like this whole thing. It's like a song. You can kind of hear it. It's like, for us, but for us Americans, that's, hey, how are you? Because what do we expect to hear? I'm fine. But what do you do when you hear, my world is falling apart and I don't know what to do? Sorry, don't have time for that. Right? Because that's what we do. And honestly, the person that says it is also expecting you to do that too. But I contend that that's not how we build community. I think we need to be ready for the long answer. We need to be ready for somebody to pour out to us or their heart and soul. I drive Uber. I actually do it for fun. I actually enjoy it sometimes, meeting people occasionally. And I'm blown away sometimes the things people are willing to share with complete strangers. But they're probably not willing to share that with those people closest to them, the ones that could really help. Now, I pray for those people, and I try to help whatever I can. Sometimes I don't get to see them for very long. But it's amazing. They just pour their heart out to you if you're willing to listen. Be willing to do that. But sometimes be willing to ask a different question. Be intentional. Try to get to know people. Try to get to the heart of the issue. And try to love on them. And then, some of you aren't going to like me for this one. But be willing to be vulnerable with them. I remember before Jessica and I got married, we got a book given to us, and it was called, I don't know if we got it or we found it, we bought it, I don't know what it was. We got this book. I'll never forget the book. And it was 101 questions you should answer before you get engaged. Now, we screwed up because we had already been engaged before we read the book. But we were taking a trip to Wisconsin. Jessica is from Wisconsin, and the land of happy cows and cheese. And we drove up there. I don't know if that was the first time. It wasn't the first time I'd been to Wisconsin, but it might have been the first time we had traveled up there together. And so we were just been engaged. I believe this was either the end of July or beginning of August, because we were going up for the EAA Experimental Aircraft Air Show. It was the first time I got to experience that. And it was right after we got engaged and right before I was going to move to the town of Natoma, Kansas, 350 people, to start teaching. And so we decided that we had this long trip. We had a 10-hour trip there and a 10-hour trip back. And so we decided it would be a great idea to read this book together while we were driving. So I was driving and she was reading the questions, and we were going to go through this book and we're going to answer all these questions. We had this lofty goal of getting all of them done on this 20 hours that we were driving. At least I did. She probably thought there's no way. And so we're driving along, and she opens the book and she says, she looks at the first one and she goes, "Nope." And I was like, of course I can't see it because I'm driving, right? I'm keeping my eyes on the road, and I'm like, "What do you mean, nope?" And it probably, knowing her as well as I do now, it probably took her a half an hour before she told me what that nope was. And so I probably the whole time was like, "You got to tell me what's going on. This is our relationship, right?" And we're just fleshing it out. And I said, "So what's that first question?" And she said, "It says, what makes you vulnerable?" I'm like, "What's question number 2? Seriously, we skipped it. Now, we answered that question, and it's funny because questions 2 through 101 almost answered that question for us. But after we had talked about all these other things, about money and about how many kids we wanted and what our marriage would look like and who was going to do what and all these great questions, we finally came back around and talked about what makes us vulnerable. We shy away from vulnerability. We do not want to be vulnerable. I look at vulnerability as something that you tell somebody that then that person could take that information and use it to hurt you. We don't like to be hurt. So what do? Well, we all have different ways of doing things, but in essence, we all clam up, we keep it inside, we don't share it with the world. Sometimes we'll share it with God. Sometimes we'll find somebody really close to us that we'll share it with. And I'm not saying you should be willing to share every deep and dark secret you have with everybody you come in contact with. That's not where I'm at. But when you build community, you will have people in your life that not only are you willing to share these things with them, you know they're going to help you walk through the fire. And that's what we need. We all need people like that in our lives. And the next one goes exactly with that. Because let me be honest, if you're not trustworthy through that process, you'll never get them back. It takes a lifetime to build trust and one incident to lose it all. It's so hard. It's hard. There are times that people share things with you where you should feel obligated to share with somebody else, but only in the sense that you're trying to get them help. And that person should be willing to keep that confidence as well. This is not stuff. If something's shared with you in private, it's probably not meant to be shared with the public. And we have to be careful with that. But we need to help people, and sometimes we can't do that by ourselves. But we've got to be trustworthy. We have to love those people in a way that we can hold that to them. And that helps with this too. We've got to be teachable and humble. We talked earlier about how being in unity doesn't mean we have uniformity. We need to humble ourselves and be willing to listen and learn something new. Everyone in the group has something they can add to the group that will help the community to be better. We need to let all of them use those abilities, and sometimes we have to step back and be humble and willing to learn. Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 3, says this, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think." We could probably stop right there, and that's a good point in itself. But he continues, "But to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though we are many, are one body in Christ. He is our head. He is our center. And individually members one of another. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. If prophecy in proportion to our faith, if service in our serving, the one who teaches in his teaching, the one who exhorts in his exhortation, the one who contributes in generosity, the one who leads with zeal, the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil and hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. There's a lot in there. But we have to be able to be teachable and humble. We have to be willing to let those around us and those in the group and those in the community to use their skills to make our community better. And the next one is be available. We live busy lives. I mean, I graduated from St. John High School 20 years ago, and I was pretty busy. We are so much more busy now than we were even then. And I bet if you went back another 20 years, you'd see another jump. And if you went back another 20 years, we have so much going on. We are a culture and a world on the move. It's great in a lot of ways, too. I know Jerry and Kay get to watch a lot of basketball because they're able to move about and do that. But we're constantly on the go. There's always something else. Be available. I think far too many times we miss the opportunity to serve because we're not available and we're not willing to be available. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do these activities. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I've seen so many times where something's come up and I'm like, I really don't want to go help that person today, even though I probably could. And we have to make that decision, right? Sometimes we just have too many things going on, or at the end of a long day, we just don't want to go out into the heat again. But I want to say this, never miss an opportunity to serve. Serving other people is one of the greatest things we can do on this earth, and we can't miss the opportunity to do that. Sometimes we're so worn down and tired, we just don't have a lot of energy, but almost every time I have served in that capacity, I have felt an overwhelming sense of joy at the work that I was able to do. And you know what the crazy thing is? God gives us that extra energy we need to do that when we're serving his people. It's amazing. When I'm sitting down in that chair and I'm done for the day and I get that phone call and somebody needs help, it's hard to get out of the chair. But once you do, I feel like when I sit back down in that chair or lay down in the bed that night, I sleep so much better. God gives me the rest that I need and the energy that I need to do the work that I need to do because I'm serving him. Be available. Be willing to say, I'm not going to watch this football game. I'm going to go help somebody. Be willing to say, yes, that event's important to me, but there's something else that's more important. Be willing to be with people and to help them in any way that you can. This next one is so important to me. I mean, I think we've lost this in our lives a lot of times. We're the kind of people that shut other people out of our homes. Invite people into your home. And that your home doesn't even necessarily just mean your house. But invite them into your home, into your family. Feed them. And don't just feed them food. Feed them the gospel message. Feed them love. Feed them hospitality. I love to cook, and I think it's probably because I love to eat, and that maybe is one of my weaknesses, but I've learned a lot how to cook a lot healthier than I used to. And I've learned from a lot of people. I have a lot of people in my life that cook and are really good cooks. And I think that feeding people is a wonderful way to invite them in to your home and invite them in. I think you should invite people into your home for tea, for games, for conversation, for cookies, for meals, for anything, for any reason. But I love to feed people. And as the Lord has been pressing me into going into full-time ministry, I will tell you that when I was in high school, oftentimes people would say, what are you going to do with your life? And I'd say, I'm going to be a minister. And then I went to college and I didn't become a minister. And some people were like, well, I don't know why. People change their mind all the time. But there was something in me and something that God was telling me that he wasn't ready for me to go into ministry in that way. There's all kinds of ways to do ministry, by the way, right? You're all doing ministry, I hope. And so I went to college and I studied music and I studied theater and I studied Bible a little bit too. And I loved that time. And I went to teaching and I taught, and then I moved to a Christian school and I taught music and I taught math and I taught computers for a year and I taught Bible and I taught, different classes. I was teaching at church and all of these things. But all this, and every time I thought it's time for me to go into full-time ministry, God has said, there's something he put in my way that didn't let me do it then. And he kept saying, I kept hearing, not yet. Not yet is really important. Because I didn't hear no, I heard not yet until now. And he said, now is that yet? And so as I've been thinking about that for a couple of years now and seeing how that was going to look, I decided that I needed a new email address. Because I have a personal email address, and you know how those things get? You sign up for everything online and you get all that junk. And I had one for the school that I was working at that they let me keep after we got a new one. And that one was like my church one, and it worked really well. But now that I'm not there anymore, I don't have that anymore. And so I thought, I need a new one that's just kind of like more focused, right? And it doesn't have, I'm not going to give it out online to, things to sign up for. And so as I was thinking about this, if you get to know me pretty well, you'll know that I'm really loyal. In fact, I'm loyal in lots of things. I remember even when we first were married, I still had my car insurance from Farm Bureau in St. John because I was loyal. Now, I just wanted to stay there. Now, we ended up moving that because we bought a house, things changed, but I didn't want to leave. It's just, I feel that loyalty. I love shopping at Dillon's. I'm telling you, there's something about it. Growing up, we had a Dillon's here in St. John, and we'd go there, and I'm just loyal. I still go to Dillon's when I can, and most of the time in Manhattan. And so I'm pretty loyal. And so, but I decided that I finally needed to get a new email address that was different. And so I settled on this one. And feeding the flock, 3423. Now, I think that's what God has called me to do, and that's to feed the flock. But I think it's done in more than one way. I certainly love to cook, and I've spent lots of time feeding people, up to 300 at a time. We have a lot of ministries in Manhattan, and a lot of them involve food and cooking. This is certainly part of who I am and part of my ministry. I love to feed people because when we gather together around a table, we are close. We have good conversation, we have good food, we have good fellowship, and it's a wonderful thing. But God also made me a teacher. He gave me some insight into his word and a yearning to learn more so I can teach more about him. This is also feeding the flock. You might think, well, do the numbers 3423, do they have any significance? And the answer is yes. I took these numbers from Ezekiel chapter 34 and verse 23. It says this, and I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he shall feed them. He shall feed them and be their shepherd. We're supposed to feed people in more ways than one. Earlier we talked about being vulnerable with one another, and we talked about how that trust can be broken. We've got a couple more things here, but when that trust gets broken down, guess what we need to do? Forgive. I'm sorry, but we're messed up. We're messed up people. We're broken. We mess up all the time. The Bible commands us to forgive 70 times 7, and I don't think that's a number. I taught math for a while. I can tell you that number is 490 without even thinking about it. But that doesn't mean that when the 491st time comes, I go, nope, no more. It's not what it means. We continue to forgive and forgive and forgive. People are going to become vulnerable with you and you with them, and they are going to screw up. Forgive them, bring them back in, and continue to develop that bond and that friendship. I know the trust will be hard, but I think we have to do that. So now I want to give you a few things. I want to give you a couple of things that we can do that will help build that community. We have this thing that we do in Manhattan, and it's not unique to Manhattan, but we do a thing called small groups. Now, small groups do not have to have any sort of definition other than a small group of people who get together to know each other better, who have some sort of a common interest usually, or a bond. This could be men's groups, women's groups, young family groups. This could be mixed groups. This could be, just all kinds. Anything you can think of, you could put in there. It could be a group of retired. It could be a group about parenting, anything like that. And what you do is you get together and you spend time together. You fellowship with one another. Usually there's some sort of food involved because we like to eat, and we also like to do that when we're fellowshipping. But we study the Bible together. Sometimes we just stop and we talk about the things that are going on in our lives and how we do that. Some of our favorite times from Manhattan, being in Manhattan, have been the small groups that we've been a part of. We have met some of our dearest friends in these groups, and we have been able to love and serve one another with those groups. I remember our first small group in Manhattan. It really helped us transition. And some of those people, in fact, many of those people don't even live there anymore, and we're still close to them. That group was a little different than the one we have now. That group was a bunch of older people that invited us into their home. There was one other young family that was there, and we got to be pretty close with them. And then there was some older people, and those people have been our rocks. They've been people we can call on and whatever. And now our group is much more young families. Everybody in our group is young families with kids. And so those groups can look different and they can change over time, but they are some of our greatest moments. And we're going to talk about a couple of those aspects in just a second. The other thing we can do is plan activities together. We can do game nights, holiday parties, cookouts, Bible studies, cooking challenges, fellowship. The list could go on and on forever and ever. There are so many things that we can do, but the idea is to get together and do things. Last night, we got together here at the church with the young families, and the kids got to play with water balloons. I think there was more water hose involved than water balloons. And I believe the grass is now more water than it's been all summer, which is probably good. But there was a lot of water, and there was just fun and fellowship, and we had good food, and we talked, and it was just a great time. Those are great activities, and those should happen all the time. And sometimes not everybody can show up to those, and that's okay because we're busy. But those that are there can enjoy fellowship together. And ultimately, as we get down to the very end of this, and this is my last point this morning, all of this is kind of summed up in this. We need to help people. We need to be there for them. You could list so many things here, but be willing to help people when they need it. Sometimes even when they don't tell you that they need it. Cook meals for people. Help people clean or organize their home. Help them when their car breaks down. Help people move. Help people cope when they lose a loved one or a child. Our small group that we have right now has been through the fire. The family I talked about earlier that lost their home to a flood, they were part of our small group. The husband of that family, he's becoming one of my best friends, and we spend a lot of time eating lunch together and visiting. But if I have anything go wrong on my car, he's my first call. And he drops whatever he's doing and he comes over. He either loans me a tool, sends me a YouTube video, or he just fixes it for me. I remember one time we had this tent on our window, and it was bugging me. And we bought the car, the tent was wrong. It had been bugging me for years. I couldn't see out of it. And he was off. He had to be off work because he hurt himself, and he was just sitting at home looking for something to do. And one day he said, "Hey, let me take that tent off the window for you." I didn't know what that meant. He took a razor blade. It took him 4 hours to scrape that window off and get it clean and looking good again. And he just did it. He doesn't ask for anything. He's just there. We have another family in our small group that lost a child. She was 9 months pregnant. I was their backup call in the middle of the night for their other child. I got called at 3 o'clock in the morning to come over and be with the other child. And by 6, they had lost the child. And by 8, I was in the hospital, and I was with them pretty much every day for 2 months. And I'm not telling you that to say, look at me. I'm telling you that because we need community. We need those people. We have a family in our small group that has a husband that struggles with alcoholism very bad. They went through separation. They struggled with that, and he's very, very ill. He's probably not going to last more than another few months. We live life together, but when you do that, you feel their pain. When I was in the hospital with them and listening to the doctor saying things about why the child died and all these things, and listening to what mom was saying and what dad was saying and trying to counsel them, I had no earthly idea what to say or do. I had no clue. I prayed all day when I wasn't with them that, God, I don't know what I'm doing, but all I know is you're telling me that I need to be here. This is what we need to do. Be present in their lives. I didn't come up with some profound speech. I didn't come up with the words that were going to bring them through to the other side. And whatever I did say wasn't from me, I guarantee it was from the Spirit. But I was present. Those people are so close to us now that nothing could ever separate that. They would, and it's not about gaining friends that will do anything for you, but it's about being there for them. But we loved them, and they loved us. And when we had to move out of our house for a couple of nights because our neighborhood was flooding, thank goodness none of the water actually got in our house, they were the first ones that picked up the phone and said, you're staying with us. Be present in each other's lives. Love each other. There are probably so many more things that we could have listed today that will help us build community. I mean, there's just a myriad of things. But this is a pretty good start. We were made to live in community with each other. We were made to live in unity with each other because of Jesus Christ. And that is a gift that God has given us, to walk in unity with our brothers and sisters in Christ, having fellowship with one another, and the blood of his Son purifies us from all sin. If there's a way we can help you be more like Jesus today, please come as together we stand and sing.